In the small city of Benicia, where the sun shines over the Waterview apartment homes, neighbors say they never quite felt comfortable with the man in Unit 34.
He would just start talking crazy about things.
30-year-old Robert Allen Dickens has special needs. In his service provider's newsletter, staff said he adjusted well into his new community, but neighbors disagreed.
Because I didn't trust him around children or anyone.
This woman, too frightened to give her identity, says Dickens wasn't exactly quiet about his past.
He would talk about how he had beat people up when he was in a mental hospital and in juvenile hall. He talked about sexual assault that would happen from his parents when he was a child.
Unbeknownst to his community, Dickens was arrested for rape in 2005. He wasn't convicted, but was charged with rape again in April 2017.
Anyone who knew him or saw him, all of us wondered, why is he out? Why is he allowed to be walking around?
And that was the question, asked not only among neighborly whispers, but among people and agencies tasked with the responsibility of keeping the public safe. Court documents obtained by 2 Investigates show in June 2017, a judge agreed to release Dickens while he was awaiting trial for rape, as long as the human services agency called Omiliga and the nonprofit corporation North Bay Regional Center guaranteed 24-hour supervision to protect the community. According to court transcripts, supervision meant a one-on-one caretaker who'd contact authorities if he were to leave from their supervision. Despite the agreement, one of those caretakers, just 1 month later, says she was never briefed.
You had no idea of the environment in which you were entering.
I have no idea. If I knew this kind of thing, I would have said no.
The caretaker would only speak to us if her identity was concealed. For the purpose of our story, we'll call her Martha.
I noticed like when he opened the said the room was dark. Said, oh, my bulb went out and so I said, okay. But before I knew it, he was behind me. He was standing and everything was going dark. Next thing I knew that happened was I was on the floor. He was over me. He had pulled down my pants to almost knee length and my underwear. Then I woke up and I just started, fighting back. And I was saying, I bind you, and then you can't do this.
If you didn't fight back, what do you think would have happened?
Well, of course, he would have had his way. He would have raped me whether he could have killed me, I don't know.
Martha fought off Dickens. He was arrested and charged with battery and attempted sexual assault. With her attorney, Jessica Pride, Martha is now suing her employer, Omiliga. On its website, it advertises care for adults with forensics backgrounds, meaning trouble with the law.
Well, first, what does forensic involvement mean? I think the common person doesn't know, and it's not fair that someone who didn't have the skills to take care of a predator was put in a position to be harmed by him.
2 Investigates wanted to know who should be held accountable. Although Omiliga hired Martha, the North Bay Regional Center, or NBRC, is responsible for monitoring all of Omiliga's services. NBRC is an independent nonprofit that receives millions of taxpayer dollars and more every year. The amount of money it gets depends on the number of clients it serves. Our team found state oversight appears to be minimal. NBRC failed to meet state standards for auditing vendors like Omiliga for years, according to performance reports.
Mr. Dickens had a prior rape arrest, and he was currently at that time facing rape charges. And they had a duty to inform her of that.
2 Investigates first reached out to Omiliga. The organization would not comment. Then we went to the North Bay Regional Center, where its executive director said he was advised not to say anything. Finally, we went to the state, specifically to the Department of Social Services and the Department of Developmental Services, because they oversee California's human services industry.
We stopped hearing back. My name's Candace, I'm with KTVU.
Michael?
Yeah,
nice to meet you.
No one would comment on the case, but one spokesperson did say it's not the state's job to regulate supported living services, which Dickens received. When asked, should it oversee this growing sector? No response.
Do you think what happened to you was preventable?
Yes.
To the people in this small Benicia community, they still believe the man in Unit 34 fell through the cracks. And the agencies responsible, they say, put them all at risk.
Because it could have been me. It could have been other women.
Starvation, neglect, and sexual abuse. Those are some of the serious complaints from the disabled community here in the Bay Area.
Back in February, 2 Investigates told us about major problems with one care provider. Now our team is taking the investigation further. KTVU's Candace Wynn uncovered more cases of alleged abuse and accusations that the system, which is meant to protect the disabled, is failing.
That's right, Frank and Julie. Now, there are a lot of layers to the oversight of this industry that cares for our disabled population. It's a system that hasn't changed in years. So follow me as we break it all down. The state is legally responsible for providing care for more than 300,000 people with severe autism, intellectual disabilities, and epilepsy. Now, these clients get their care from providers such as group homes and human services agencies. These providers are paid and overseen by agencies called regional centers. Regional centers are the acting arms of the state. Now they get paid billions of taxpayer dollars from the California Department of Developmental Services to pay for all of these programs. Programs the state and again these regional centers are supposed to oversee. But one whistleblower says that's not always happening and cases of abuse and exploitation are going unchecked. Finally coming forward.
It was crazy.
Roberto Franco is shedding a light on what he saw as hidden horrors impacting our community's most vulnerable.
I've been trying, to tell people about it, the things that I've seen.
As the number of people with developmental disabilities grows by the thousands every year and billions of taxpayer dollars pay for their care, he says staying silent about the lack of oversight was not an option.
We're talking about people that need a lot of support.
Franco's story starts where his last job ended. He was fired from the North Bay Regional Center last year. Supervisors called him inappropriate and unprofessional, but he believes he was penalized because he reported too many problems. As a service coordinator, Franco says it was his job to report client issues, and if he didn't, neglect and abuse would go unnoticed.
I went to visit this group home, where one of my clients was. His mom was, from Argentina. She was concerned that her son was losing weight. So I walked into the kitchen. I saw the first thing that I saw was the refrigerator was the doors. Were tied up with a shoelace, and there was no food available. For them. To eat. My client's mom told me that she's been complaining to Norbert Regional Center for a long time, but nobody was paying attention to it.
Franco reached out to 2 Investigates after seeing our first report in February. Staffing problems with a service provider led to a female employee caring for a client facing rape charges. She wasn't briefed on his history, and he ended up attacking her.
I have no idea. If I knew this kind of thing, I would have said no.
This caretaker sued and settled with her employer, the service provider. Franco says this case, though, was just one of many. Are people's lives at stake if these things go unnoticed?
Oh, yeah. When I was working with another client that was like in a kind of foster home setting, they were saying that he was getting depressed. And so I started questioning the caregiver. What's going on? Have you documented all this? And he said, no, I haven't documented anything.
After more questioning, it took a week for Franco to find out there had been a SWAT standoff at his client's home involving a gun and tear gas. Police had busted into the house, leaving it unbearable.
So I couldn't even stand, being there for 5 minutes because my eyes were itching, they were irritating. I couldn't even breathe.
Franco says the bigger problem was the service provider never reported the standoff to the regional center. All incidents where a client is hurt or could be hurt have to be reported. An employee of that provider told 2 Investigates the client wasn't home during the shooting and was never in direct danger.
I asked the agency, person there, that why they didn't report that to Norbert Regional Center. So they say that their QA department said that it was not reportable.
How was that not reportable?
I don't know.
The North Bay Regional Center declined to talk about specific cases, but in an email, its executive director wrote, after the SWAT standoff, his staff moved the client to a different home. After hearing about the tied-up refrigerator, state regulators closed that care home a year later. Although these issues were eventually addressed, Franco says that wasn't always the case.
There were other cases that we brought up, to the attention of our regional center, but they were now, I guess, taking care of it.
It's not just the North Bay. Lack of oversight concerns stretch statewide. In this January budget proposal, the State Department that oversees this industry asked for more than $8 million to restructure. Budget documents show the state wants to create new positions to deal with expanding caseloads and more complex client issues like severe aggression, self-injurious, and even fire-setting disorders. What makes matters worse, it says, its current organization structure has remained largely unchanged for several years. We've asked the state several times for an interview about these concerns, but a spokesperson said, quote, "We will let the detailed budget proposal speak for itself." Do you feel you were retaliated against for coming forward?
Yes, I was.
Franco says the real victims, though, are the taxpayers and clients. Taxpayers who will pay into this $7.8 billion state industry this year alone, and clients, many of whom can't speak up for themselves and rely on a system that he believes should do better.
Where the mattress was so urine soaked that it went clear through the mattress, rotted the box springs, and the bed was on the floor with no sheets.
This father says his disabled son was forced to live in subhuman conditions. He joined a parents group speaking out after seeing a 2 Investigates report on abuse of the disabled. For months, 2 Investigates has been reporting on an oversight system that is overwhelmed with cases.
Candace Wynn is here now with their new call for action.
Yeah, Frank and Julie, legislation was passed decades ago serving as a promise by the state to ensure people with developmental disabilities live fulfilled lives. But after our report in April, parents and industry workers came to our studio saying that promise has been broken.
As a parent of any child, you always tell your child, if somebody hurts you, speak up. Mom and dad will step in and make it right. There comes a time, I don't mean to cry, when your son, your daughter is telling you they've been hurt, and the feeling that you can't do anything about it.
Painful helplessness felt by Mitch Freeze and these parents who've never met, but all have children with developmental challenges.
My daughter Nancy was 31. She's severely autistic.
Here is Nolan Raleigh, is Down syndrome.
They and former service coordinators are speaking out after seeing multiple 2 Investigates reports exposing abuse in the disabled care industry.
I said, I think it's time to step up here.
Finally, somebody is going to start looking into all of this. There's no oversight in the regional centers.
Regional centers are nonprofit corporations. There are 21 across the state, 5 in the Bay Area region. The state's Department of Developmental Services contracts with these agencies to serve more than 300,000 disabled clients statewide. Every year, there are more clients. Every year, more taxpayer money goes into the system. Mitch Freeze says the lack of oversight of services is worse than you can imagine.
You watched your child suffer broken bones. The bones in both eye sockets were broken from a beating by a staff member. He suffered a broken collarbone by a staff member.
Issues with his son's care started small, he says. He and his wife first reported basic hygiene neglect and bedwetting problems while Joe was under the care of a company hired by the North Bay Regional Center in Napa. The service provider was supposed to look after Joe, while the regional center was supposed to monitor the provider. More than a year later, Joe's parents were reporting indescribable living conditions.
Where the mattress was so urine soaked that it went clear through the mattress, rotted the box springs, and the bed was on the floor with no sheets. And yet, nobody cares.
The responses they got were the same, they say. We're working on it, a regional center employee wrote multiple times in an email. Someone will go to Joe's house, he said in another. 14 months after their first report, the regional center told them the care provider was getting a new director, and they were still working on relocating their son. By a show of hands, who thinks this is a bigger issue than has ever been reported?
Who spoke out before but felt no one heard you?
I can't say that there's no abuse and neglect going on. We're not in every single home.
Javier Zaldivar oversees the San Andreas Regional Center. He can't legally talk about specific cases, but says the system is strained by low pay rates for services set by the state.
It's very difficult to find a staff with a skill set that will be able to deliver that kind of service. We do our best to make sure that cases aren't falling through the cracks.
Have there ever been deaths as a result of a lack of oversight? Or sex assault or neglect?
There have been incidents that have been questioned, and oftentimes the questions are, was the appropriate staffing in place? I don't know if it's about oversight, if it isn't more about the quality of the staff that is providing the care.
Whatever the reasons, these families feel the state is failing on its promise to support the disabled.
Is that promise being kept?
I think the promise is complicated.
For now, Freeze says his family and others live in fear of the uncertain.
There comes a day when you got to get on that airplane and go home. And you hope you've negotiated better conditions when you leave. But you know in the back of your mind that something else is going to happen.
2 investigates getting results. Family members we spoke to about California's disabled care industry say their loved ones are now getting better help after our investigation. 2 investigates Candace Wynn has the update and the statewide effort to get to the bottom of these problems. Candace.
Aliana, a state assemblyman is currently reviewing this complicated care system. The data collected, he says, will be used to create legislation and policy solutions to address systemic issues we've exposed that impact the developmentally disabled community.
Regional centers are nonprofit corporations the state contracts with to monitor care for people with disabilities like autism and Down syndrome. For months, 2 investigates has been reporting on the strained regional center system that's allowing some severe cases of abuse and neglect to fall through the cracks. Last month, parents of developmentally disabled children and adults joined a whistleblower to shed light on these systemic problems. After our story, Ray Galindo says his adult son finally received services after nearly 6 years without them in the North Bay. Mitch Freeze, whose son was forced to sleep on a urine-soaked mattress, says their regional center executive director in Napa came up to him and promised that would never happen again under his watch. Finally, there's Marie Dubois and her son Nolan, who has Down syndrome. She told us Nolan came home with mysterious injuries, and finally a regional center member is working one-on-one with her to get answers.
It changed a lot. I have to say thank you to Channel 2 because my case manager called me. I believe they saw the story because she mentioned it. So now she fighting hard for Nolan to trying to get him somebody so I can go back to work.
Assemblyman Frazier is also holding public meetings across the state to hear from affected families and providers. So far, he's hit 8 cities, including Concord, Fresno, and Sacramento. Frazier says all of his results will be brought to Governor Newsom. Candace Wynn, KTVU, Fox 2 News.